Hello, and welcome to this video on dominant seventh chords in open spacing. At this point, if you have not watched the previous lectures on dominant seventh chords, dominant seventh chord inversions, and introduction to open spacing, I would highly encourage you to watch those videos now, as these lessons are intended to be viewed in sequence. In the previous video, we looked at how a dominant seventh chord is built up from the root using a major third, a perfect fifth, and a minor seventh. However, all the examples we looked at were in closed position. In this video, we are going to explore dominant seventh chords in various inversions that have been put into open spacing. It is important to remember that the spacing of the notes does not necessarily affect the inversion of the chord or the quality of it. The process of looking at a dominant seventh chord in open spacing is very similar to the process we used for the other chords. The only difference is where in the other chords we doubled one of the notes. In a dominant seventh chord we have 4 different notes. Our first step is to look at the different notes in the chord to determine what type of chord we're looking at. Initially, I would recommend writing out the notes as a root position chord using closed voicing. This will help you determine the various intervals to determine what type of chord you're dealing with, whether you're dealing with a 3-note triad or 4-note seventh chord. In this first example, we see that we have a C, an E, a G, and a B flat. When we stack them all in thirds, we realize that C is the root and that we have a C dominant seventh chord. We know this because if we look at the intervals, we can see that we have a major third from the C to the E, a perfect fifth from the C to the G, and a minor seventh from the C to the B flat. Our second step is to look at the bass note, or the lowest note in the chord, to determine what inversion we are in. In this case, C is the lowest note, and since C is the root, we know that we have a C dominant seventh chord in root position. Using step 1 for the next example, we can see that we have the notes F, A, C, and E flat. If we put them in an order where they're stacked in thirds, we can see that F is the root. If we figure out the intervals of this chord, we will figure out that we do in fact have a dominant seventh chord with F as the root. Our second step is to look at what note is the lowest note. In this case, A is the lowest note. Since A is the third of the chord, we have an F dominant seventh chord in first inversion. Using the first step for our third example, we will see that we have the notes G, B, D, and F. If we write those and stack them all in thirds, we will realize that G is the root of this chord. If we look at the intervals between the root and the other notes, we will see that we have a major third, a perfect fifth, and a minor seventh, making this a dominant seventh chord. Our second step is to look at what note is the lowest note in the chord. In this case, we can see that the D is the lowest note in the chord. If we refer back to our root position closed chord, we can see that D is the fifth, meaning that this is a G dominant seventh chord in second inversion. The final chord that we look at uses the notes A, C sharp, E, and G. If we stack those in thirds, we will notice that A is the root of this chord. Looking at the various intervals between the root and the other notes in this chord, we will realize that we have a major third, a perfect fifth, and a minor seventh, making this an A dominant seventh chord. If we look at the bass note of this chord, we will see that G is the bass note. In this case, G is the seventh, meaning that we have an A dominant seventh chord in third inversion.